Smooth blending is often seen as one of the most important skills in miniature painting, but today I am going to ignore it completely. In this video, I'll paint this entire model without blending or traditional techniques, to show you how a rough style can still produce a miniature that looks good on the tabletop. So with the boring base coats out of the way, let us start by tackling the skin and explaining what this painting style is all about. Over my purplish base coat, I will very roughly sketch the volumes of the model using only two colors, which, as you can see, jump quite a bit in tone from one to the other. Instead of slowly blending between colors, the idea here is to jump straight to the contrast, because when a miniature is viewed from tabletop distance, strong value changes matter far more than perfectly smooth transitions. In regards to the brushstrokes, I simply follow the shape of whatever part I am working on, and fill it in with lines, leaving some of the base tone showing here and there, as well as in the recesses, like in between the muscles. Now, two things to point out here. On one hand, the skin provides a bigger and more comfortable area to start working on and break the ice, but we will see how to deal with the smaller sections later on. On the other hand, even those recesses that are facing upwards, which I have thought in the past should not be the same color as our shadows, I am intentionally leaving dark, because our focus here is visual impact. No smooth transitions, no perfectly correct light placement. Instead, the goal is something that, at tabletop distance, instantly jumps out and reads clearly. Think of this almost like sketching with a pencil. You are not carefully rendering every surface. You are suggesting a form with confident marks, and letting the viewer's eye fill in the rest. And for those of you worried about the technique behind achieving this rough succession of lines, here is a trick. Instead of holding my brush with 4 fingers and using the fifth for support while slowly tracing the lines, I hold the brush with only 2 fingers, and use the third finger to push the brush into motion. While doing this motion, I slowly move the brush downwards, until the tip of my brush catches the surface. This results in a succession of thin lines full of character. The goal here is not control in the traditional sense. The goal is rhythm. Once you stop trying to force every stroke to be perfect, the brush naturally starts creating interesting textures on its own. But this approach was only applicable for the bigger muscle groups, which provide me with enough space to work comfortably. When it came to the rest of the model, however, things became less technical and much more free. But before we see how that looks, a quick note while painting the horns growing out of the skin. As you can see, they received the exact same base coat as the skin, and this was intentional. Not only does it save time, but it also helps integrate them more naturally into the skin itself. Just like with the muscles, I leave some of the base coat visible here and there. I know that a purple base coat is probably not the first thing that comes to mind when painting horns, but I had to say that along with the skin, it ended up becoming my favorite part of the model. And this highlights another advantage of painting this way. Unexpected color combinations often appear naturally when you stop over-planning every step. Following through with this idea of sharing base tones between elements, the same was the case for the armor. This time I went for something a bit safer, a reddish-brown base coat that will be shared between the red armor panels and the golden trim. When painting this red armor, this is where simplicity truly starts to show. I am applying the paint with small dashes and dots, doing my best to avoid the recesses against the trim, so that some of the reddish-brown base coat continues to show through. This part was not smooth, and not even textured in the same way as the skin. I was simply getting the color there as best as I could, without worrying if it looked sloppy or rough. And the key to placing the paint where I want it actually lies in something much simpler: the brush load. Whether it is after mixing paint or when picking it up from the palette, if your brush looks like this, not only will that damage your brush in the long run, but you can also forget about getting the paint to behave properly. Always rinse your brush and work the paint into it up to the halfway mark along the bristles while unloading it with a slight twisting motion. This might seem tedious at first, but after doing it a few times, it quickly becomes second nature. And once it does, your brush will start behaving much more like a marker or a pen, where the paint goes exactly where you intend to. Ironically, the rougher the style you aim for, the more important this simple control becomes, because controlled brush loading gives you freedom to paint fast without losing direction. When it came to the golden trim, however, I encountered a bit of a problem. I could simply use metallic gold paint, which would certainly be fast and effective, but that would not really follow through with the rough paint style I have been using so far. The other option would be to continue painting the trim using non-metallic metal, which would mean carefully thinking about light placement, reflection and gradients. But that immediately raises a question. Do I really need to? Because the moment I start thinking about painting gold, I also start thinking about all the rules that supposedly come with it. Where the reflection should go, where the shadows should sit, how smooth the blend should be. But what if I simply stop thinking about it as gold? What if I just treat it as yellow paint? So instead of trying to render perfect metallic reflections, I simply approach the trim as another colored surface. An ochre yellow for the base, a brighter yellow for the highlights, a few rough strokes to suggest where the light might catch. And that is it. Because sometimes the biggest obstacle in painting is not technique, it is expectation. The moment you stop trying to paint the correct version of something, you give yourself permission to simply paint what looks interesting. We now move to the final areas of the model, which include the axe and the leather parts. And in hindsight, what I initially wanted to be a very dark violet base tone ended up looking almost black, which did not really hurt the result too much. But I do think that a more colorful base tone might have added more visual interest, just like the purple skin or the reddish-brown armor base. Throughout the whole process of painting this model, I made sure to leave as much footage as possible in the video, because I wanted to truly show what the brushstrokes look like in real time. No secret blends, no hidden touch-ups off camera, just plain rough painting, pushing forward instead of stopping every time something looks imperfect. And this is probably the most important mindset behind this approach. Momentum is often more valuable than perfection, because when you keep moving forward, the miniature slowly comes together as a whole, instead of getting stuck polishing a single area while the rest of the model awaits unfinished. This becomes especially important when I move on to painting the axe. Here I did embrace the non-metallic metal idea a little bit more, but even then I kept the same rhythm going. I did not carefully analyze every reflection, I simply placed paint. A few lines here, some scratches there, not asking myself if each stroke was good or bad, just pushing forward until the model started to come together. And very often that is when the magic happens. Not when you plan every stroke, but when you give yourself permission to simply paint. Now, for those unfamiliar with the idea behind non-metallic metal, the technique is normally about recreating the reflections of metal using regular matte paints instead of metallic ones. Instead of relying on metallic pigments, you paint the illusion of reflection yourself, by placing very bright highlights right next to very dark shadows. That strong contrast is what tricks the eye into reading the surface as reflective metal. Normally, this technique involves very controlled blends and carefully placed reflections. But here I approached it exactly the same way as the rest of the model. Loose brushstrokes and quick scratches. Not worrying about perfectly placed reflections, but simply suggesting them. But the truth is, a lot of techniques in miniature painting can feel intimidating the first time you try them. Even if you watch a tutorial and you understand the theory behind it, once you sit down with a brush, it still doesn't quite make sense. And that's completely normal, because theory alone rarely makes something click. It usually takes 2 or 3 attempts, sometimes more, before your hand begins to understand what your brain already knows. Watching a tutorial can show you the idea, but only practice can teach your brush what to do. So instead of trying to get everything perfect on the first attempt, sometimes the best thing you can do is exactly what we did in this video. Just keep moving forward. Put the paint down, see what happens, learn from it on the next model, and more often than not, you will end up surprising yourself with the result. If you would like to learn the more traditional approach to non-metallic metal, I do have a dedicated tutorial on the technique, which I'll link in the description below. But with that, this tutorial comes to an end. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope you found the video helpful. If you did, a like and a subscription are always appreciated. As always, feel free to leave your questions or suggestions down in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.